From the second floor of Duncan Student Center, we bring you Shamrock Sports. Austin Rooney, alongside Caroline Pineda and David Korzanowski. We'd like to also welcome to campus all visitors, alumni, and everybody who will be attending the game tomorrow against New Mexico. We got a lot to cover this weekend. We excited for the first game of the season at home?
Yeah, so excited. It feels weird to have such a delay before the home opener after last year with Michigan right off the bat, but super excited to get the season going at home.
I'm ready for the run out of the tunnel and the band to get going.
Let's go. Shamrock Sports is next.
Hello, I'm Father John Jenkins, President of the University of Notre Dame, and thank you for watching Shamrock Sports.
Welcome back inside the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. Again, joined by Caroline Pineda and David Korzanowski. And guys, let's just jump right into it. We've seen a lot. We've seen 2 weeks of college football now. And let's start away from Notre Dame. We'll get into the matchup against New Mexico and their matchup next week against Georgia in a few moments here. But let's start with some other games around college football. What teams have you been most impressed with early in the season?
Well, I just want to take a minute and focus on the USC-Stanford game. Two Notre Dame opponents coming up later in the season on the schedule. USC came out of this one. I was shocked.
Yeah.
They beat Stanford 45-20, a resounding win. Not what I was expecting, especially when USC was unranked in the preseason polls for the first time since like 2003. So you've seen this team now come out, chip on their shoulder, and they really showed that against Stanford. So I was very impressed by USC. Not as impressed by the way David Shaw's Stanford team came out in that one.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to start with the team I was most impressed by last week, and that was Ohio State. A 42-0 win against Cincinnati. That's a team that was receiving votes in the top 25. People thought that the Bearcats would be a really solid team this year. Ohio State is one of the best teams in the country. Justin Fields, 20 for 25, 224 passing yards, 2 passing
Now, on the flip side, about teams you might not be quite as impressed with, Caroline, who's your team that you know you've seen the first couple of weeks and they haven't quite been up to par?
Yeah, so one of mine was Stanford. I kind of touched on that a little bit, but they have been dealing with some injuries, and that's there too. And the other one I think is Texas. And I was expecting them to come out with more energy against LSU. They really kind of struggled. Ellinger did not look like the quarterback that we've seen before. He had flashes of it, but I think overall I was expecting more from Texas in that matchup with LSU.
I got to go Michigan. They're really not that good. I think this is a 4-loss team this year because they went to 2 overtimes against Army. First of all, I'm putting a metaphorical crown on my head right now because I called that last week.
You did. We'll jump into that in a moment.
I believe you exactly said they're not going to win, but they are going to give them a run for their money at the end.
Right.
Yes.
Michigan is not a very good team this year. Shea Patterson has not impressed me. The defense is okay, but you can move the ball against them, and they go against some really good offenses like Penn State and Maryland later on this year. They also have to play 7 ranked teams on the back end of their schedule. I think that this is a team that's going to lose 3, maybe 4 games.
Well, let's talk about that Michigan game. Michigan played Army last week and won 24-21. Now, this is an Army team that in the past has given top 10 opponents a run for their money. A season ago, it was Oklahoma. They nearly beat them, and of course, Oklahoma found their way into the playoffs. So how good is Army? Is Army just, better than people expect, or did Michigan really just not play all that well?
I think with Army, you see every few years one of the 3 service academies, Navy, Air Force, or Army, is like a 10-win team. We've seen Navy be a really good team in the past, Air Force in the past, and I think it's Army's time right now. They won 11 games last year. I think this year, probably not the same success, but 8 or 9 wins. And the thing with them is the triple option just gives people fits. Michigan had no idea how to stop it. Army was able to move the ball. And I think looking at the other side, again, this was a sign that I think Michigan is a team that's going to struggle in the back half of the season.
I do agree, but I think of any opponent that Michigan has, Army's not a great indicator of the rest of Michigan's season since they run such a different offense. And the triple option, like you said, is just impossible to defend when you haven't fully prepared for it. So like Notre Dame playing Navy has to put that full 2 weeks into it. It's nice playing Navy off your bye to then study up and make sure that you're ready for the triple option, which is totally different than any other team you'll see.
And one last point I'll make about Michigan as well, they couldn't hang on to the ball. Shea Patterson had 2 fumbles, and then Michigan had 1 more on top of that. They fumbled 4 times and lost 3 of them. If they're going to turn the ball over, they're really going to have a lot of trouble.
Well, Shea Patterson may have fumbled a couple of times, but he did not throw an interception. He threw for 207 yards. No touchdowns still. How do you evaluate his passing performance?
I don't think he's that great, really. I think he looked really good going, at Ole Miss before he transferred. I just don't know if it's the offense, the characters around him, or Harbaugh's coaching style. He just looks uncomfortable. He has a lot better receivers this year, like Donovan Peoples-Jones, that can kind of pick up the slack for him. But I look at this Michigan offense. It's stagnant. It needs some life. It needs some zip, and Shea Patterson hasn't provided that so far.
I don't think, though, on the other hand, that Dylan McCaffrey would either. I don't think Michigan really has that dominant quarterback, and I don't think they will in the next couple of years. Harbaugh's recruited so many different quarterbacks, and none of them have really panned out. He's recruited quarterbacks. They've gotten there. He switched them, like a kid I went to high school with, was switched to a tight end, and then eventually got drafted and now plays for the Steelers. But, he came in as a quarterback, was moved. And so Harbaugh's done that with other guys, and he hasn't really found a quarterback that he's meshed with, that his offense has meshed with, and I don't know if he will in the next couple of years.
Yeah, McCaffrey struggled in his few appearances that he did have during that game. One more player I'd like to talk about, the running back, Zach Charbonnet. Okay game for him. He did have the 3 touchdowns, but averaged just about 3 yards per carry.
Yeah, I thought the Army defense was impressive. I think you're going to see a lot of really Big Ten-style games that are going to be 24-20, 24-14. Same sort of thing happened against Wisconsin last year. They go up against Iowa, Penn State, Michigan State. I could see that Michigan State game being an absolute grind. But then the offenses like Ohio State and Maryland that they'll have to go up against, I think that Charbonnet, is going to have to be a really key component of the Michigan offense.
Well, let's move on to another top 15 matchup from a week ago. Texas A&M at Clemson. Clemson controlled that game. There was no doubt about it. Trevor Lawrence had a tough week in week 1. He looked a lot better last week. He was 24 for 35, just the 1 touchdown. He did throw a pick.
I will say, though, that in both games, I was never worried about Trevor Lawrence. Like, that first game, yes, his numbers didn't really reflect the Trevor Lawrence we saw last year, but watching that game, he didn't seem fazed. He seemed like the mature quarterback that we know that he is, and that's the thing is when scouts look at Trevor Lawrence, they look at his composure among everything else that he has, and that's what's going to make him translate to an NFL quarterback. So I think he does have the games where his numbers kind of struggle, and obviously against Texas A&M, he kind of rebounded from that first game of the season, but never this season have I been worried at all about Trevor Lawrence.
I saw from Clemson a big push in the second quarter, similar to the Notre Dame game in the Cotton Bowl, one that we don't like to talk a lot about, but Texas A&M scored first in the Clemson game. They went up 3-0. Listen to how Clemson responded. They went down on a touchdown drive that was mainly sparked by Travis Etienne. Justin Ross had a 30-yard touchdown. Then they force a fumble from Texas A&M. They score another field goal to go up 10-3, then a 3-and-out from Texas A&M, and to end the half, a 9-play, 89-yard drive to make it 17-3 and pretty much push the game away. I think that Clemson looks really good when they get sort of hit first, and maybe they do have a little bit of adversity. They look very good in the second and third quarters.
Clemson's running back, Travis Etienne, thought to be one of the top running backs in college football. He did not have a great game last week. 16 rushes, 53 yards. Is that at all worrying if you're a Clemson fan?
I don't think so. I think that they have so many weapons. They can win games with their receiving core, and they can win games with Travis Etienne. He had an unbelievable game against Georgia Tech week 1. And really, that first touchdown drive of the game against the Aggies, he was a huge part of the offense.
I completely agree. We've seen him consistently come out with good numbers, and he does have other guys who can step up. So when you're a team like Clemson that has that depth, it doesn't worry me like it would worry me if Jafar Armstrong had a bad game this week. So I think it's kind of a different dynamic where you have other guys that can step up. You have those receivers, and most importantly, you have Trevor Lawrence. And that's kind of the factor that Clemson has that you can rely on, where Notre Dame, I don't think, can put their fate so heavily in the hands of Ian Book like that.
Well, let's jump into our final top 10 matchup we're going to talk about. That is the LSU-Texas game from last weekend. LSU went on the road at Texas and stole a 45-38 game. It was a close game all the way through, and LSU pulled through. They're now spiked all the way to 4th in the AP Top 25 rankings.
Yeah, well, I just want to talk about the year of the quarterback, and here it is. Joe Burrow came out 31 for 39, 471 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. That's a good stat line.
He looked great.
And so you see him, and he comes out, and this is a quarterback that I think had some question marks around him, and now has so dominantly established himself as one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Sam Ehlinger, on the other hand, didn't have the game that I was quite expecting, but still a good quarterback, and still has the chance in the rest of the season to prove himself with this Texas team.
Well, Sam Ehlinger, you can't discount what he did, though. 31 for 47, 401 yards and 4 touchdowns. So still a dominant performance from him, too, David.
He looked great. I thought Texas was going to win this game mainly because of the home field advantage. I got to say, LSU was impressive, especially in that first half. They went up 2 touchdowns. It wasn't really until the third quarter that Texas started to claw back into that game. I think that this speaks to a larger theme, which we'll talk about a little bit further on. If you are a road team going into a hostile environment in a top 10 matchup, Notre Dame, Georgia, you have to start strong because LSU controlled that first half, sucked the crowd out of it, go up 2 touchdowns, and they're in the driver's seat for the rest of that game. Joe Burrow, he didn't have the pressure of having to make a huge drive in the fourth quarter because his team in quarters 1 and 2 was so good.
Well, we've taken a look at some of the big-time matchups from last week. Let's look at some of the matchups for this upcoming week, and with more on that, we send it to Charlie McFadden.
Hi, I'm Charlie McFadden, here to give you a look at the big games in college football this weekend. First, we'll look at the interstate rivalry between the 19th-ranked Iowa Hawkeyes and the Iowa State Cyclones. The Hawkeyes are coming into the week with a 2-0 record, including a 30-0 blowout against Rutgers last week. Iowa quarterback Nate Stanley is a player to be on the lookout for, as he has started the season hot with a 64% completion rate, 6 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. For the Cyclones, senior wideout Deshaunte Jones poses a large threat to the Iowa secondary, as he has already caught 14 passes with an average of 9 yards per catch. Iowa is favored by 2.5 points going into the game, so it is sure to be a good matchup on Saturday in Ames. Another good matchup this weekend is between the 5th-ranked Oklahoma Sooners and the UCLA Bruins. Oklahoma, with their new quarterback Jalen Hurts, the transfer from Alabama, has been lighting up the scoreboard over the past 2 weeks, with a collective point total of 129 points, 70 coming last week. Hurts has had a fantastic start to the year, throwing at a staggering 83% completion rate and throwing 6 touchdowns. UCLA has had a much tougher start to the beginning of the year, with 2 losses coming at the hands of San Diego State and Cincinnati. They haven't gotten their footing yet, but this home matchup against a perennial powerhouse has them excited for a shot at revamping their season. Another exciting matchup this weekend is between the 9th-ranked Florida Gators and the Kentucky Wildcats. Both teams enter this weekend with a 2-0 record. Kentucky with solid wins over Toledo and Eastern Michigan, and Florida with victories over Miami, Florida, and Tennessee Martin. Kentucky quarterback Terry Wilson leads his squad with 2 touchdowns through the air and 1 on the ground with a 64% completion rate. Florida quarterback Felipe Franks has been taking charge for the Gators, already passing for 500 yards with a 77% completion rate and 4 touchdowns. The Gators enter the game as 8-point favorites. Expect this to be a good one in Lexington. Now back to you.
Thanks so much, Charlie, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the games this week, some of them that Charlie mentioned, and we'll talk about a couple others first. Let's start with that Iowa State game. That's where College Game Day is this week. If that gives you any indication, there aren't many good games this week. Let's jump into that. Who is your team in this Iowa State matchup? Is it a big game at all in your opinion?
No, it's not a big game at all. There are 6 games this week where the spread is less than 10 points out of top 25 teams. There are only 2 games where the spread is less than 6 games where the spread is less than 10 points, 2 games where the spread is less than 5 out of top 25 matchups. The 2 that have a spread of less than 5 points, USC versus BYU and Iowa versus Iowa State. I don't know, Big 12 versus Big 10 matchup. I think it'll be a cool environment. Those teams don't like each other. Yeah. It's a rivalry in week 3. I think Iowa State wins after kind of a disappointing result that they had in week 1. But I don't know. Iowa's also looked good, and they're a team that is pesky against top 25 and some solid teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think this one goes to Iowa State. I think the environment of having game day there for the first time, having that hype around your program that they don't get very often, and because there's no good games this week in the top 25, really that kind of goes to them. I think Iowa State takes it at home.
Well, a game that maybe was probably bigger a week ago that is not quite as big now is the UCF-Stanford matchup. Yeah. Stanford disappointed in a big way last week. They take on a UCF team that's perennial 11-12 win team. Who do you see taking home this matchup?
I think UCF. I mean, they've built a really good culture down there, and Dylan Gabriel has looked great. So far this season, 372 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. Brandon Wimbush getting benched after the first game, and then Gabriel goes out against FAU, and he looks great. This UCF offense is electric. 55 points per game, 634 yards average per game. Stanford's in trouble, too. Costello missed the USC game with injury. I don't know how he comes back and how healthy he really is.
See, I go the other way. I think that David Shaw is going to come into this and have his team ready. Last week they lost to an unranked opponent that they shouldn't have lost to, and so I think he'll have them ready. They're not going to let it happen again. I think Costello will come back and look good in this matchup. I think Stanford beats UCF.
One thing I'll add, it is a must-win for Stanford. If they go 1-2, they're in trouble and could lose 4 or 5 games this year.
Another note on UCF, though. I mean, we talk about teams that, like UCF, they need to play big games. And you look maybe 3 years ago, this Stanford game would have been a marquee matchup where hopefully you're playing a top 10 team, and UCF has an opportunity, should they go 11-1, 12-0, make that playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make a huge point about college scheduling, but you can't forecast how a team's going to be in 4 or 5 years. Like when Notre Dame scheduled that home and home against Texas, it was like, oh my gosh, these two teams are amazing. Notre Dame lost in double overtime. Texas wasn't great that year. That was sort of before this rise that they've had in the past couple years, and Notre Dame went 4-8. So I think as long as they're scheduling those Power 5 opponents and opponents like Stanford, it doesn't really matter how Stanford does in this particular year. The fact that they're scheduling the games and hopefully for UCF getting the results is a step in the right direction.
I agree, and I think it comes as much with playing Stanford for the name of Stanford as it does with Stanford being that good of a team. And obviously it means more if Stanford is coming out and, is undefeated going into this game and hasn't just lost to USC. But you still look at them playing a Stanford football team. That's still a big deal, and it still is going to be a big win for UCF if they pull it off.
Well, let's jump into the matchups for the top 3 teams in the country. Starting with Alabama, they're on the road at South Carolina, an SEC matchup. Can South Carolina make it close?
I've seen a lot of cute tweets about the Gamecocks winning this game. I guarantee that, South Carolina wins. I've seen a lot going on. This is a team that lost to UNC week 1. Nothing against the Tar Heels. I think Mac Brown's doing a good job in his first season down there. This South Carolina team is not going to beat Alabama. I think that, the usual recipe is they keep it close for the first quarter, the crowd's into it, and then Tua comes out and throws for 5 more touchdowns. And I think Bama wins by at least 3 touchdowns.
I agree, if not more, and I think it probably will be more. And I mean, you look at just how Alabama comes out and the swagger that we've kind of talked about before. They have that, Clemson has that. Very few teams kind of have just, the mentality that Alabama has coming into these games. And so you see Alabama come in against New Mexico State, and the spread is 54, and
right.
When New Mexico State keeps it to 52, it's exciting. So this is not going to be an Alabama team that has any struggle against South Carolina.
And also, have you seen Nick Saban's been mad this week? He's had a lot of angry press conferences, and when Nick Saban has angry press conferences, I feel like he takes that out and just obliterates his opponent.
Slight disclaimer, Nick Saban often has angry press conferences and angry post-game interviews and angry pre-game interviews and angry halftime interviews. So
he often has angry interviews, and Alabama often blows out their opponents. So I've seen
maybe
correlation.
There's a correlation.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe Dabo should just.
Was he angry before that Clemson game?
Oh, I don't know. Maybe he was too mellow.
When was the Maria Taylor?
That was the season opener last year. So quit asking.
Well, let's jump into the other top team in the country, or just the team that's ranked number 1. In Clemson, they're playing a Syracuse team that was ranked going into last week. They're not close to ranked anymore.
Yeah, tough look for the Syracuse team getting obliterated by Maryland. And Maryland is a good team. I will give them that. But Syracuse just really, really struggled on all fronts. Offense, defense, just didn't have anything going for them. And, coming in against a really good team now, I don't think there's any way they're even close.
I think, so the last time Syracuse and Clemson played in the Dome was 2 years ago, and that was the one loss that Clemson had that year before they went to the playoff and lost to Alabama. I think Clemson wins this game pretty easily. I think that Dino Babers' squad is not as good as they were last year. But again, same sort of thing. They're going to be coming out strong because of that bad result that they had against the Terrapins last week. I still like Clemson, though. Too much talent.
Big question, though. Any way Clemson shuts out Syracuse? Because we almost shut out Syracuse last year. The big deal, field goal at the end of the game, garbage time field goal, should have been a shutout. Any way that you think that Clemson can do that?
I think there's a chance. I don't think it'll happen. I wouldn't put money on it, though.
Fair enough. All right, well, let's jump into Notre Dame football now, and with the 3 keys to the game, we set it down to Paul Farrington.
I'm Paul Farrington with your 3 keys to the game. Key number 1, contain quarterback Sharon Jones. With starting quarterback Brant Hughes out of the game, Sharon Jones steps in for the first time in the New Mexico offense. Coming over from Tennessee last season, Jones only completed 54.8% of his passes with a 13-12 touchdown to interception ratio. If Notre Dame defensive ends Julian Okwara and Khalid Kareem are able to keep Jones in the pocket and force him to win the game with his arm, there's a good chance that he'll make a mistake. Key number 2, establish the run game early and often. With Jafar Armstrong likely to miss the next several weeks, Tony Jones Jr. faces an increased load for the Irish. However, in this game, it'll be vital that Notre Dame gives him the ball early in order to open up the passing game for Ian Book. Book has been able to excel in the intermediate passing game in the past, but his long throws have always been a problem. So by establishing a running game early, Notre Dame will be able to take some deep shots if safety coverage were to inch up towards the line of scrimmage. Key number 3, come into the game with an aggressive mindset. Last season, Notre Dame struggled against both Ball State and Vanderbilt, leading up to their game against Stanford. Coming into this contest, Notre Dame can easily overlook a team like New Mexico with Georgia approaching in Week 3. However, Brian Kelly must do a better job, and he stated this in his press conferences, of having his team ready for New Mexico.
Well, thanks Thanks so much, Paul, as we welcome you back inside the second floor of the Duncan Student Center. And let's talk a little bit about this game tomorrow afternoon. Notre Dame taking on a New Mexico team that had just 3 wins a season ago. They did pick up their first win of the season last weekend against Sam Houston State. New Mexico did. What did you see from New Mexico last week? Yeah,
the first thing I want to talk about is why these two teams are playing, and that's Bob Davie, head coach down with the Lobos, and he had a really serious incident during that week one win. He was hospitalized. It was really scary. He said the doctor saved his life. Brian Kelly tweeted it out, thoughts and prayers to him and his family. And he'll be back, and he says he really wants to coach. I think it'll be cool to sort of have him come back to a place where he coached here at Notre Dame. From the New Mexico team themselves, I think this is a pretty routine win for Notre Dame, kind of like that Temple game a couple years ago. Notre Dame's just better in all facets, and right now New Mexico has a quarterback problem.
Yeah, they do. They have a lot of problems, and one of those is Davie's health. And so the last I had heard actually was that he wasn't going to make the trip.
Right.
So, coming into that without your head coach and having him come back to practice, that was a big boost for morale because they kind of needed him back. And there was a neat video of the players seeing him come back in the team room for the first time. But I think, you look at the bigger picture for UNM, this is not a team that typically is a great football program. So you come into Notre Dame, you now have the chance that if you beat Notre Dame, this makes or breaks your season. And so you could go winless the rest of the year. And if you say that you beat Notre Dame, it's a huge deal. So you now are going up against one of those opponents where, this is obviously the biggest game on their schedule by far. Do I think it makes a difference in the result? No. But do I think it's a huge game for New Mexico, and do I think they come in ready? Yes. They do have a quarterback issue. They have a couple of question marks there. They had 4 guys who were potentially going to be the starter going into the season, and then the projected starter had to go to California because he had a family member who was sick and eventually passed away. So just a lot of turmoil with the program and a lot of issues going on. Kind of a team that's a little all over the place right now.
Well, let's talk about Brant Hughes. Had a shoulder injury in week 1. He was a starting quarterback. Now the role goes to Sharon Jones. What do you see from him as starting quarterback? He was 6 for 11 last week.
Yeah, the thing with New Mexico, they still don't have a passing touchdown this year. Jones, he's kind of dual threat. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 6 rushes for 35 yards against Sam Houston State. I think their running game is better than their passing game. Amari Davis, 107 yards rushing. He had a 53-yard run and 2 touchdowns. I just think that Notre Dame's defensive front is too much.
I actually spoke to Coach Davie a few weeks ago during their fall camp, and he said they're going with this hybrid spread offense that they've talked a lot about. He's brought in a new offensive coordinator, and so they're trying some new stuff, trying to kind of mix things up and find a quarterback who fits that. And the difficult thing is that it doesn't really seem like they have one. I would expect that Jones doesn't play that many minutes and that Tavaka Tuioti ends up coming in and playing more than Jones, just because Tuioti wasn't at the Sam Houston State game. He was in California taking care of his family matters that were going on, and so having him come back, he was in the game last year a lot. He did get a lot of minutes, played a lot of snaps with the Lobos. I think he'll kind of be the guy that kind of steps up against Notre Dame, that they give the chance to.
One more question here. Is there any possibility this is a trap game? Notre Dame overlooks New Mexico, is looking towards Georgia. Is that a possibility? Could it be close?
I think that if New Mexico was a better team, say they were a 4 or 5 win team or a team, from the lower end of the Power 5, it could definitely be a trap game. It's just the fact that New Mexico has so much turmoil, so many question marks, head coach isn't here, and already have a dearth of talent. That's a recipe that Notre Dame should go into Georgia 2-0.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's always a possibility to overlook a team, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was a little bit of Notre Dame's issue this week if they get out to a slow start. Yeah. I don't think it means they lose the game, though. I think maybe they do kind of have a little trouble at the beginning. They have a tendency to do that. We've seen that happen, even Louisville, And so I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of stall a little bit, but I do see them picking that up, and I don't see overlooking an opponent being a reason they would lose this game.
We'll get your predictions at the end of the show. First, let's send it back down to Charlie McFadden. He has a look at the freshman for Notre Dame this season.
Hi, I'm Charlie McFadden, and this is the Fighting Irish Freshman Football Review. Most of the hype surrounding this 2019 Notre Dame football season is focused on a talented pool of upperclassmen. With captain quarterback Ian Book back at the head of the offense, a veteran receiving tandem of Fink and Claypool, and a solid defensive core, the Irish are poised for another successful season. What's also promising about this new Notre Dame football season is the bevy of new talent in Notre Dame's freshman class. To start off, perhaps the most talked about Notre Dame freshman football player is 6'3" Kyle Hamilton, the 5-star out of Georgia. In his senior year of high school, he totaled 72 tackles, 8 defended passes, 4 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and 2 defensive touchdowns. His length, mobility, and one-of-a-kind athleticism will almost certainly contribute to the already deep Irish defensive backfield, along with Alohi Gilman, Sean Crawford, and Jalen Elliott. Hamilton chose the Irish over Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan. On the other side of the ball, another exciting addition to the Irish football team is 4-star guard Zeke Correll. Standing at 6'4", 280 pounds, the Cincinnati-born lineman has the potential for both ferocious power and good mobility. Correll has taken snaps at center this offseason and could replace new Chicago Bear Sam Mustipher at center, a position the Irish are in desperate need of. If the Irish hope to rebuild the O-line to what it was in the Heastan era, guys like Correll will have to step up and fill pivotal roles. Lastly, freshman quarterback Brendan Clark is an offensive threat to be on the lookout for this season. Standing at 6'1", 217, Clark brings with him dual threat capabilities as he led his high school team with 35 passing touchdowns and 17 rushing touchdowns. The 19-year-old out of Virginia is most comfortable in the pocket, but is good at evading pressure and creating big plays for himself. The Irish's spread offense is a perfect fit for Clark. The coaching staff is hopeful that he and sophomore quarterback Phil Jakovich will be good replacements once starter Ian Book graduates. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks so much, Charlie. Bring you back inside the Duncan Student Center, and let's talk about Georgia here as we finish up. And Georgia, of course, is the marquee game on Notre Dame's schedule. And, of course, we are even overlooking this New Mexico game this week. You know, it's only 24 hours away, but the real game is 8 days away. It's down in Athens, Georgia. Notre Dame's going to have a tough test in their hand. Jake Fromm's one of the best quarterbacks in college football.
Yeah, this Georgia team is scary. I mean, I haven't slept in weeks just thinking about this game.
You won't sleep for the next 8 days?
I will not, clearly. It's going to be a hostile environment. I think this is the biggest road game that Brian Kelly's ever had, honestly, because the only other ones that come to mind, Oklahoma, Miami was a top 10 matchup. That was later in the season in November, so maybe that's up there. But this Georgia team is maybe the best team he has gone up against in a regular season. I mean, they are insane. Their offensive line, average weight is 328 pounds. I know I talked about that last week. In the NFL, the average weight for an offensive line, 315 pounds. So this Georgia offensive line is unbelievable. Isaiah Wilson a little bit banged up. The running game is actually what scares me more than Jake Fromm. DeAndre Swift is one of the quickest backs in the league. If he gets to the outside, past the defensive line of Notre Dame, it's on those inexperienced linebackers to make the tackle, and I don't know if they can.
I agree. I think, you look at Georgia as one of these teams that is kind of on the brink of being a Clemson or an Alabama, and I think this could be the season that does elevate to them, and that's a scary thought because we are playing Georgia in 8 days. And so when you look at this Georgia team, I mean, Kirby Smart has done so much with them, and Jake Fromm can be kind of his guy now to take them to the next level. He talks about how much Fromm studies outside of football. He said he watches film. He does so much that even before he was at Georgia, he was already trying to do as much as he could, and he said, Coach, send me stuff. Let me, look at things. Let me try to get as much as I can under my belt so that when I do get there, I can help you as much as I can. So this has been, years in the making for Jake Fromm, and now is finally his chance to take this program to the next level. And I don't want to say Notre Dame is just a step on the way to get there, but I'm a little afraid that's what this game is going to turn into.
They can win the national championship this year. Absolutely.
I agree.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Well, we talked about DeAndre Swift. Had a good game last time out. 6 rushes, 67 yards, 2 touchdowns. Big week for him. Let's talk about Notre Dame. What can they do against this Georgia defense? Is Ian Book good enough to complete those intermediate range passes and give the Irish a chance to win?
The number one thing they have to do is start strong like LSU did against Texas. Notre Dame kind of did it in the Cotton Bowl against Clemson. Move the ball. You don't need home run plays. 7-yard passes, 3-yard runs. That'll get the job done. Try to establish your rhythm and take the crowd out.
And to look at the defense on the other side, you need guys like Drew White to step up, and you need them to kind of fill these holes that were left by the seniors that left last year. And so you need just the guys that are going to step up and make big plays on offense, and I think more importantly on defense, I would say, to step up and do what they can, to play UNM, to play Georgia, whatever the opponent might be.
Well, let's jump into some predictions now. So we got the New Mexico game tomorrow. We're going to get all of our predictions for that now. David and I won't be on the show for Georgia next week. So we're going to also give you our predictions for the Georgia game next weekend. Let's start with New Mexico. Caroline, you're up. What's your score?
I think Notre Dame comes out of this one with a little bit of a slow start, but picks it up pretty quickly, has a good offensive performance. I think Notre Dame wins 45-13.
I got a close score. I say 41-13. I think Tony Jones Jr. has a big game.
All right, I'm going to go 45-10. I think Notre Dame runs away with this one. Now let's jump into Georgia. David, what's your call?
I'm going to go 28-13 Georgia. I just don't know if Notre Dame can move the ball offensively against that really good Georgia team.
Last time Notre Dame had a really big game against Georgia, they kept it close. I'm saying another close one this time. Believe it or not, Notre Dame pulls it out. 17-13 in Georgia. That'll do it from us here on Shamrock Sports. We'll be back next week. You'll be joined by Caroline Pineda, Ellen Geyer, and Paul Farrington.